The wind howled across the English Channel on a cold November morning in the year 1688. A massive fleet of warships sliced through the gray waves toward the southern coast of Devon. On the deck of the flagship stood a man with a destiny to reshape the world. He looked toward the shoreline of Torbay, where the fog began to lift, revealing the cliffs of England. This was not merely an invasion force, but a calculated gamble that would alter the course of history. Soldiers checked their muskets and tightened their belts as the coastline drew nearer. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the heavy weight of impending treason against the crown. England stood on the precipice of a civil war that threatened to tear the nation apart at its seams. King James II had alienated his subjects through his devout Catholicism and his attempts to bypass the laws of Parliament. The memory of the bloody civil wars from the previous generation still haunted the minds of the people. They feared a return to absolute rule, where the monarch could dictate religion and law without consent. The tension in London was palpable as rumors spread through coffee houses and market squares. Protestant nobles whispered in dark corners about the need for drastic action to save their faith and their liberties from a king they could no longer trust. King James II believed firmly in the divine right of kings, which stated that his authority came directly from God. He began to place Catholics in positions of power within the army and the universities, which violated the Test Acts. These laws were designed to ensure that only members of the Church of England could hold public office. His actions alarmed the Anglican establishment and the powerful landowners who saw their influence waning. James dismissed the fears of his subjects as mere hysteria, but his actions suggested a deliberate plan to return England to the Catholic fold. The king seemed blind to the growing resentment that simmered beneath the surface of his kingdom. The situation reached a boiling point with the birth of a son to King James and his second wife, Mary of Modena. Until this moment, the heir presumptive had been his Protestant daughter Mary, who was married to the Dutch stadtholder William of Orange. The arrival of a male heir meant that a Catholic dynasty would now rule England indefinitely. Panic spread through the Protestant population, who had hoped that the reign of James would be a brief interlude. Wild conspiracy theories began to circulate, claiming that the baby was an impostor brought into the birthing chamber in a warming pan. The birth of the Prince of Wales transformed a political dispute into an existential crisis for Protestant England. 7 powerful men known to history as the Immortal Seven gathered in secret to draft a treasonous letter. They represented the most influential families in the land and spanned the political spectrum from Whigs to Tories. This letter was an invitation to William of Orange to invade England and restore English liberties. They pledged their support to William if he would bring an army to protect the Protestant religion. The risks were enormous, for if the plot were discovered, these men would face execution for high treason. The letter was carried to The Hague by a trusted messenger disguised as a common sailor to avoid detection by the spies of the king. William of Orange was a shrewd and calculating statesman who had spent his life fighting the expansionist ambitions of Louis XIV of France. He saw the invitation from England not just as a chance to save the Protestant faith, but as a strategic necessity. If James allied England with France, the combined power would overwhelm the Dutch Republic. William needed English resources and naval power to counter the French threat on the continent. He accepted the invitation, but proceeded with extreme caution. He spent months assembling a formidable invasion fleet while publicly claiming he only wished to mediate between King James and his subjects. The preparations in the Netherlands were massive and conducted with great speed to catch the English off guard. William assembled an army of over 14,000 mercenaries and volunteers, along with thousands of horses and artillery pieces. The Dutch fleet consisted of hundreds of transport ships protected by 50 ships of the line. The logistics of moving such a force across the unpredictable North Sea were daunting. William waited anxiously for the wind to turn in his favor. For weeks the wind blew from the west, keeping the Dutch ships trapped in their harbors while allowing the English fleet to patrol the channel. Suddenly the weather shifted and a strong easterly wind began to blow, which became known as the Protestant wind. This meteorological miracle allowed the Dutch fleet to sail out into the open sea while trapping the English fleet in the Thames estuary. William gave the order to launch, and the Armada set sail in a magnificent formation that stretched for miles. The banners on his ships proclaimed his motto, "I will maintain the liberties of England and the Protestant religion." The vast array of sails on the horizon struck fear into the hearts of those watching from the coast. The invasion of England had officially begun. King James was paralyzed by indecision as the news of the approaching fleet reached London. He had a professional army that was numerically superior to the forces of William, but his confidence was shattered. He could not be certain of the loyalty of his troops or his commanders. Many of his officers were Protestants who were deeply unhappy with his religious policies. James ordered his army to assemble at Salisbury Plain to intercept the invaders, but he delayed giving the order to march. His hesitation allowed William to land unopposed and establish a strong foothold on English soil without firing a single shot. William landed at Brixham in Torbay on the 5th of November, a date already significant for the failure of the gunpowder plot. The local population welcomed him cautiously at first, but soon cheers rang out for the Protestant deliverer. William maintained strict discipline among his troops, ensuring that no looting or violence occurred against the civilians. He declared that he came as a friend to Parliament and the people of England. The discipline of the Dutch army stood in stark contrast to the rowdy behavior often associated with the royal troops. This strategic benevolence helped to win over the hearts and minds of the common people. The march toward London was slow and deliberate as William waited for the English nobility to rally to his cause. At first, the gentry were hesitant to commit treason, openly remembering the failed rebellions of the past. However, the tide began to turn as key figures declared their support for the Prince of Orange. In the north, rebel lords seized the city of York and declared for a free parliament. In the west, the gentry began to ride into the camp of William with their tenants and retainers. The isolation of King James grew with each passing day as his support structure crumbled away like dry sand. The morale of the royal army collapsed as defections began to occur among the highest ranks of the military. Lord Cornbury, the son of the Earl of Clarendon, was the first major officer to defect, taking his regiment with him. This betrayal shook King James to his core, as Cornbury was a member of his own family. The king arrived at Salisbury to lead his army, but found the camp rife with suspicion and defeatism. He suffered from severe nosebleeds, which he took as a bad omen, and his physical health began to deteriorate rapidly. The once confident monarch now looked like a broken man. The most devastating blow came with the defection of John Churchill, the future Duke of Marlborough and the ablest commander in the English army. Churchill had pledged his loyalty to James, but his commitment to Protestantism proved stronger. He slipped away in the night to join the camp of William, taking other key officers with him. James was stunned by the betrayal of a man he had raised from obscurity. The loss of Churchill signaled to everyone that the military cause was lost. James ordered a retreat to London, but the withdrawal soon turned into a disorderly rout as more soldiers deserted. The betrayal extended into the immediate family of the king when his younger daughter, Princess Anne, fled from Whitehall Palace. She escaped down a back staircase in the middle of the night, accompanied by her close friend Sarah Churchill. When James returned to London and discovered that his own daughter had deserted him, he broke down in tears. He exclaimed, "God help me, for my own children have forsaken me." The psychological blow was immense and stripped him of his will to fight. He felt completely alone in a capital city that was becoming increasingly hostile to his presence. Anti-Catholic riots erupted in London as the authority of the king disintegrated completely. Mobs attacked Catholic chapels and the residences of foreign ambassadors known to harbor priests. The burning of mass houses and the destruction of religious icons became a nightly occurrence. The Lord Mayor of London struggled to maintain order as the train bands were overwhelmed by the sheer size of the crowds. Wild rumors circulated that Irish troops were marching on the city to massacre the Protestant population. This period of panic, known as the Irish Night, added to the chaos and the desperate desire for William to arrive. King James decided that his only option was to send his wife and infant son to safety in France. He disguised them and arranged for a secret passage across the Channel to the court of Louis XIV. Once he received word that they had arrived safely, he resolved to follow them into exile. In the early hours of the morning, he slipped out of the palace in disguise. He took the great seal of the realm which was necessary to summon Parliament and threw it into the River Thames. He hoped that by destroying the seal, he would make the governance of the country impossible. The escape of the king was botched when he was recognized by fishermen near the coast of Kent. He was treated roughly by the locals who thought he was a Jesuit priest in disguise. The humiliation of being handled by commoners was a severe shock to his royal dignity. He was eventually rescued by the local gentry and returned to London, but his authority was gone. William was not pleased by the return of the king, as he had hoped James would simply disappear. The presence of the king in London created an awkward constitutional problem that needed to be solved quickly. William sent his Dutch Blue Guards to take up positions around the royal palaces in London, replacing the English troops. The sight of foreign soldiers guarding the King of England was a shocking visual representation of the conquest. James was woken in the middle of the night and told that he must leave London for his own safety. He was escorted to Rochester, where he was deliberately left with lax guards. William wanted James to escape again to avoid the difficult decision of what to do with a captive monarch. James took the hint and fled to France on the 23rd of December. The flight of King James left England without a functioning government and created a power vacuum. William arrived at St. James Palace and was greeted by cheering crowds and the ringing of church bells. He refused to seize the crown by right of conquest, preferring to adhere to legal forms. He summoned a convention parliament consisting of the members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Their task was to determine the legal status of the monarchy and to settle the succession. The debates that followed were intense and touched on the very nature of sovereignty. The convention parliament wrestled with the difficult question of whether James had abdicated or was still king. The Tories argued that the king could not be removed and that a regency should be established. The Whigs argued that James had broken the contract between king and people and had therefore forfeited the crown. They eventually agreed on a compromise formulation that James had abdicated the government by breaking the fundamental laws and fleeing the kingdom. This legal fiction allowed them to declare the throne vacant without explicitly stating that they had deposed the king. The question of who should fill the vacant throne was the next major hurdle for the convention. Some favored making Mary the sole monarch as the hereditary heir with William as her consort. William flatly rejected this idea, stating that he would not be his wife's gentleman usher. He threatened to return to the Netherlands if he was not granted the crown in his own right. Mary supported her husband and refused to reign without him. The solution was a joint monarchy where William and Mary would reign together as king and queen, with William exercising the executive power. Before offering the crown to William and Mary, the Parliament drafted a document known as the Declaration of Rights. This document listed the crimes of James II and asserted the ancient rights and liberties of the English people. It declared that the suspending of laws by regal authority without consent of Parliament was illegal. It also condemned the levying of taxes without grant of Parliament and the keeping of a standing army in peacetime. The declaration was read aloud to William and Mary at the banqueting house in Whitehall before they were formally offered the crown. William and Mary accepted the Declaration of Rights and the offer of the crown on the 13th of February. This moment marked the true beginning of the Glorious Revolution and a fundamental shift in the English Constitution. The coronation took place at Westminster Abbey in April, with the Bishop of London officiating. For the first time in English history, the monarch swore an oath to govern according to the statutes in Parliament agreed on. The divine right of kings was effectively dead, replaced by a monarchy that derived its authority from the consent of the governed. The principles of the Declaration of Rights were enacted into law as the Bill of Rights in 1689. This landmark statute laid the foundation for the modern constitutional monarchy in Britain. It guaranteed freedom of speech within Parliament, ensuring that debates could not be questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. It also prohibited cruel and unusual punishments and excessive bail. The Bill of Rights shifted the balance of power permanently from the Crown to Parliament. The king could no longer rule by decree or ignore the will of the elected representatives. The religious settlement was addressed through the Toleration Act, which granted freedom of worship to Protestant dissenters. While it did not establish full religious equality, it ended the persecution of nonconformists who had suffered under the previous reigns. Catholics, however, were still excluded from public life and the throne. The Act of Settlement later ensured that no Catholic and no one married to a Catholic could ever inherit the crown. This cemented the Protestant nature of the British monarchy, which remains a central element of the Constitution to this day. The revolution in England was bloodless, but the transition in Scotland and Ireland was violent and bloody. In Scotland, the Convention of Estates voted that James had forfeited the crown and offered it to William and Mary. However, a strong Jacobite faction remained loyal to James, led by Viscount Dundee. They rose in rebellion and won a stunning victory at the Battle of Killiecrankie. Despite the victory, Dundee was killed in the fighting, and the rebellion soon lost momentum. The Scottish resistance was eventually crushed, but the Highlands remained a hotbed of Jacobite sentiment for decades. Ireland presented a much greater challenge, as the Catholic population remained fiercely loyal to King James. James landed in Ireland with French support, hoping to use it as a base to retake his English throne. He summoned a parliament in Dublin and began to raise a massive army. The Protestant population in the north barricaded themselves in the city of Londonderry and endured a long and brutal siege. The cry of no surrender became the rallying call of the defenders, who faced starvation and disease. The siege was finally lifted when English ships broke the boom across the River Foyle. William realized that he had to intervene personally in Ireland to secure his new kingdom. He landed at Carrickfergus with a multinational army of Dutch, Danish, German, and English troops. The two kings faced each other across the River Boyne on the 1st of July, 1690. The Battle of the Boyne was the decisive engagement where William led his troops across the river under heavy fire. James fled the battlefield before the outcome was fully decided, earning him the nickname James the Shit among the Irish. The victory secured the Protestant ascendancy in Ireland for centuries. The aftermath of the war in Ireland saw the flight of the wild geese as thousands of Irish soldiers left for France. The Treaty of Limerick ended the conflict, but the promises of religious toleration were soon broken by the penal laws. These harsh laws stripped Catholics of their rights to own land or hold office, creating a legacy of bitterness. While the Revolution brought liberty to England, it brought conquest and subjugation to the Catholic majority in Ireland. The events of this period remain a source of deep division and historical trauma in Irish history. The Glorious Revolution also triggered a financial revolution that transformed England into a global superpower. The need to finance the wars against France led to the creation of the Bank of England. The system of national debt was established, allowing the government to borrow money at low interest rates. This financial stability allowed the Royal Navy to expand and protected British trade routes across the globe. The combination of a parliamentary government and a robust financial system proved to be a winning formula. England began to eclipse the Dutch Republic and France as the dominant economic power. The war with France continued for 9 long years, as Louis XIV tried to restore James to the throne. The conflict was fought on the continent and at sea, draining the resources of both nations. William proved to be a tenacious war leader, holding the Grand Alliance together against the might of France. The war finally ended with the Treaty of Ryswick, where Louis was forced to recognize William as the lawful King of England. This diplomatic victory solidified the results of the revolution and ensured the survival of the new regime. The death of Queen Mary from smallpox in 1694 left William to rule alone for the remainder of his life. He was never popular with the English people, who saw him as a cold and distant foreigner. However, they respected his commitment to the Protestant cause and his ability to defend the nation. William continued to work closely with Parliament, establishing the precedent that the monarch must govern through ministers who commanded the confidence of the Commons. The cabinet system of government began to evolve during his reign, laying the groundwork for the office of Prime Minister. As the health of William declined, the question of the succession arose once again. Princess Anne was the heir, but none of her children had survived to adulthood. To prevent a return of the Catholic Stuarts, Parliament passed the Act of Settlement in 1701. This act settled the crown on the Electress Sophia of Hanover and her Protestant descendants. It passed over dozens of Catholic claimants who had a better hereditary claim. This act demonstrated the absolute supremacy of Parliament to determine who would sit on the throne. King William III died in March 1702 after a fall from his horse when it stumbled on a molehill. The Jacobites would later toast the little gentleman in black velvet who had caused the death of the usurper. William left behind a transformed nation that was no longer subject to the whims of an absolute monarch. The framework of constitutional monarchy was firmly established and would prove remarkably resilient. The principles of 1688 influenced political thinkers across Europe and eventually in the American colonies. The Glorious Revolution was not just a change of kings, but a fundamental restructuring of the relationship between the state and the individual. It established the rule of law and the concept that the government exists to serve the people. While it was an aristocratic coup, rather than a popular uprising, its long-term effects were democratic. It ended the centuries of struggle between crown and parliament that had plagued England. The bloodless nature of the coup in England disguised the radical nature of the political settlement. The legacy of the Glorious Revolution is woven into the fabric of modern democracy. The Bill of Rights served as a model for the United States Bill of Rights a century later. The ideas of John Locke, who wrote his two treatises of government to justify the revolution, became the intellectual foundation of liberal democracy. The rejection of divine right and the acceptance of limited government were revolutionary concepts that changed the world. The events of 1688 proved that a nation could change its government without descending into anarchy. Today, the Glorious Revolution is often remembered as a smooth and inevitable transition to modernity. However, for those who lived through it, the outcome was far from certain. It was a time of high-stakes gambling where the fate of nations hung on the direction of the wind. The courage of those who invited an invasion and the determination of William of Orange saved England from absolutism. The Bloodless Coup was a pivotal moment when the trajectory of history shifted toward liberty and parliamentary rule. As we look back at the events of 1688, we see the birth of the modern political world. The delicate balance achieved between the monarch and the parliament created a stable system that allowed Britain to thrive. The Glorious Revolution demonstrated that political power ultimately rests on the consent of the governed. It remains a powerful testament to the enduring human desire for freedom and the rule of law. The whispers of that time still echo in the halls of democratic institutions around the globe.